The governor of the state, the president of the United States, encouraged the pillaging of workers' hard-earned benefits. Where was the United States Congress? Where was the national media during our strike?
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
So let's talk about this. This is kind of the elephant in the room here. That is the latest from the Warrior Met strike. Probably, one of the biggest stories for us here in our neck of the woods in a while. And the news is that the UMWA, the United Mine Workers of America, has sent an offer of unconditional return to work to Warrior Met Coal. And I've got a lot to say about it, and I have a lot of thoughts, and I have a lot of feelings. I have lots of feelings. And, I don't know even how to say all of it necessarily, but so... I figured the best thing to do is just kind of start with some of the mechanics and logistics as far as we know and talk about what's next for the miners. We're going to do a little bit of how this happened, a little bit of recap, and a little bit of how this happened, how it is that the union has felt like the union feels like they've been pushed into a situation where it is necessary to conduct a what is, I think, most optimistically described as a tactical retreat. I think that would be the most optimistic way you could describe that. So an unconditional return to work. What does that mean? Well, friend of the show, Luis Felice Leon, shared an old Labor Notes article from 2006 by Robert Schwartz titled Returning to Work with an Inside Campaign that I think is really helpful in figuring out, like, mechanically and logistically what the law says and what the state of play is at the moment. And so reading from this article, after an unconditional return to work, it is actually illegal to hire permanent replacements or to award permanent status to temporaries after the offer is received. There are only two lawful responses to a union return to work offer. That is acceptance or lockout. Any other response starts the back pay check clock for each striker entitled to reinstatement. If the employer accepts the offer, it must set a prompt reporting date for strikers whose positions are vacant or filled by temporaries. In an unfair labor practice strike, it also must displace permanent replacements, but this almost always requires NLRB intervention. If the employer initiates a lockout, either immediately or as a reaction to the union's inside activities, the employer will face several problems. One, it will not be able to hire additional permanent replacements. And two, if the employer has committed ULPs, unfair labor practices, such as making unilateral changes, insisting on non-mandatory bargaining subjects, or refusing to supply the union with relevant information, the NLRB can declare the lockout illegal and order the employer to reinstate workers with back wages. When strikers return to work under an unconditional offer, the employer must resume the wages, benefits, and privileges in the expired collective bargaining agreement, except for changes that the employer has lawfully imposed after a bargaining impasse. So that's some interesting stuff there. And I definitely trust the legal analysis of Robert Schwartz. He's a very good resource. Again, that article is a 2006 article from Labor Notes titled Returning to Work with an Inside Campaign. And we also know that this is an unfair labor practices strike at Warrior Met Coal, meaning that while the workers do have, economic bargaining concerns, right, the strike is legally built on illegal actions by the company, such as bad faith bargaining. And when workers strike in response to violation of labor law, as opposed to striking strictly over economics, their jobs are protected, meaning that they may not be permanently replaced. Under a conservative originalist reading of the National Labor Relations Act, their jobs would always be protected when they go out on strike, because the National Labor Relations Act prohibits you from firing workers for striking. But activist conservative judges on the judiciary have created out of whole cloth what is termed the McKay Doctrine, which states that you can permanently replace striking workers, which is somehow different than firing them. Legal fiction. Completely legal fiction. Warrior Met hasn't responded yet, which is a bit eerie for me. And we don't know what tack they're going to take, but we'll definitely keep you updated. We'll talk about this. I'm presumably Warrior Met is going to respond by next week, and so we'll tell you what. We'll give you the updates next week. I don't understand. It's just really, it's a really, really sad situation. And there are some folks in the chat that are saying, our leaders, we surrender. And, there are times that a surrender is the best option, right? I mean, there are times when there's just not anything else you can do. Your employer is too powerful of an opponent at the time, and the best thing for the workers is for them to be able to get back on the job and be able to earn a paycheck and prepare for the next battle, right? Working people, Connor Lewis mentioned on Twitter that sometimes working people lose, right? So working people fight, and sometimes we lose, and that's just what happens. And so, the decision at this point to return to work, I'm not necessarily prepared to totally condemn as a betrayal of the strike, just because sometimes you lose, and it's. You need to, I guess, need to know when to fold, I guess, right? Even though it's sad, right? It's sad, and maybe it's not the best decision. Maybe, I'm open to saying that it's not the best decision, and there were other ways, and there were ways that they could have made the strike effective while people were out on strike. I'm open to that, but I don't know that it's, just a total. To return to work, I don't know that that's a total betrayal, right?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, I think you could describe this as a tactical retreat, and you laid out some of the options that could come into play depending on how Warrior Met responds, right? This could transition to a lockout, which would, change the nature of the fight. But yeah, I want to echo your comments there that, right now on February 18th, can I say, 100% how I feel about these decisions? No, I can't. I imagine people with more experience than me and greater wisdom than me in this labor movement will have plenty of hot takes and analysis and, debriefs on this. I'm not a member of UMWA. I'm not a coal miner. So I am just speaking as someone from the outside who has nothing but love and solidarity for these sisters and brothers and respect for, what has been a righteous struggle against very, very long odds for quite a long time now. So I know you're going to get a little bit into the background of how we got to this point and why this strike occurred in the first place. But I wanted to mention that there's plenty of room for debate on strategy and tactics. And I think as members of this labor movement, we should be able to do that, right? With some respect for each other and an understanding that we're not always going to agree. But if we're all in this for working people, we're going to have to make tough decisions, and they're not always going to work.
Right.
And that's just, some of my initial thoughts there before we dive back into the background.
Yeah. David asked in the chat, has the NLRB actually ruled that a ULP has taken place, or is the UMWA just claiming that? And I'm not totally sure, but the UMWA has always maintained that this is a ULP strike. So at least we can say that the NLRB has not said that a ULP has not taken place. right? Because because the UMWA wouldn't be able to claim that this is a ULP strike if the NLRB had shot that down. So
Right.
So it's at least still an open question. And Warrior Met has not announced a plan to make these people permanent replacements, right? I mean, there's never been any indication from Warrior Met, any press release or anything saying that, okay, we're going to begin permanently replacing these people. So I mean, as I understand it, these people have always been temporary replacements, and so then at the time that letter was received, these people should theoretically be able to get back to work. You know, the letter was for them to be will be able. The letter was saying that they'll return to work on the 2nd of March. And so you know, theoretically, you know, these people are going to be able to get back to work as they continue to negotiate as they continue negotiations for the contract. So, and you know, somebody else mentioned in the chat, I'm ambivalent on this. Maybe the material conditions with the ranking file has reached a breaking point. Maybe that's the case. I do know that there wasn't a vote taken to send this, and I think that's a mistake. I would disagree with that. I would think that the people on strike should be able to vote on whether or not they want to continue the strike. And if they want to continue the strike, then it seems to me that there would necessitate like a need to change the strategy somehow, right? And then somebody else in the chat says, every union buster will talk about that 23-month strike that accomplished nothing. And yeah, definitely, you know, that's the, you know, I mean, and that's the case. And like I said, sometimes working people lose. Sometimes a righteous fight is lost, and that's just the way of the world, right? But that working people lost this fight does not mean that working people shouldn't fight, because we can also look and see the fights that working people have won, and we can also see the righteousness of their fight, and we can see ways that it could have turned out differently. And we'll just talk about, you know, how a lot of this is just happenstance because of the market, and we'll get into that later. But yeah, somebody else replied, union busters will say anything at all. And to be honest, Southern fossil fuel union workers are not mentioned much at all by union busters, especially in retail union fights. Yeah. Although these are not fossil fuel workers, but understand the point. You know, David also mentioned in the chat that, you know, a surrender was the best option 3 months in. And, you know, maybe that's the critique, is that they just, you know, that this just went on too long, and there wasn't enough, that there wasn't enough analysis about do we have the power to win this struggle?
Right. What was the theory of change?
Right.
Initially, what was the theory of change within, 3 months in? Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of those questions that I think are fair to ask and are going to be asked by, the members as well as allies and supporters.
Yeah. And, David also replies to the fellow saying that, everybody's going to be talking about the 23-month strike that accomplished nothing. David says, we did the same thing in 95 for a 3-month strike, and we still hear about it today. We did the same thing. We returned to work unconditionally after a 3-month strike, and like this, didn't win anything, and we still hear about it today. It's important to be honest early, and that's the failure of leadership and planning. I think that makes sense. So, we also wanted to remind folks, that it is just the case that Warrior Met caused the strike, right? That's just the fact of the matter. This has been going on so long, and in many of the updates, you don't get the full background, and that's all understandable, and we're not even going to be able to go into everything now, but the big picture is that in 2015, Walter Energy, which is what this company was called back then, they went bankrupt. And as the UMWA president, Cecil Roberts, said in a testimony before Congress, he reminded folks that it was the people at the top of the company that made the decisions that caused the bankruptcy more than anybody else. You know, nobody asks coal miners about how to make investment decisions. Nobody asks coal miners about priorities for the business. Nobody asks coal miners even whether they ought to hire more coal miners, right? You know, one of the things that people will say, and I'm not convinced that this is the case here, but one of the things that people will say is, oh, well, they got too greedy and there's too many people making too much money. They don't even get that decision. It's the decision of the bosses whether they hire more people or not, right? That's the whole thing. And yet, when Walter Energy went bankrupt, it was the miners who were temporarily out of work. The leeches at the top stayed rich. And this is made all the more insidious because there's every reason to believe that this bankruptcy, like so many in the coal industry, was not the unfortunate result of decisions made in good faith by enterprising businessmen, but a purposeful decision meant to shed them of their obligations to the workers, which is what happened. Because basically, after Walter Energy went bankrupt, magically, because of the bankruptcy laws in this country that were the subject of the hearing in D.C., where Tommy Tuberville read from company press releases, because of the bankruptcy laws, Walter Energy no longer had a legal obligation to continue paying retirement or anything at all to the former employees. They had no obligation to negotiate with the union that the workers had voted for. They had no obligation to do anything. Somehow, just by magic, all of their obligations disappeared, right? All of their obligations to people who sacrificed their entire life to the company. 60, 70, 80-year-old people who spent 30, 40, 50 years in the mines. They're not owed anything. Magic. It's all gone. And while the leeches kept their spot at the top, sucking the value out of the people that, you know, that actually do the work, right? I mean, in the most literal sense of the word, the CEO of Warrior Met is the same as the CEO of Walter Energy, Walter Scheller. Many of the board members are the same too. The people who, under the, you know, the capitalist idea of bankruptcy, the people who made the wrong decisions, they're still at the top. They haven't faced any repercussions, professional, personal, financial, anything, for sending this company into bankruptcy. And so in order to save the retirees' pensions and in order to maintain the representation status of the union and in order to save the company from the, in all likelihood, purposeful destruction of its profitability by Walter Scheller, the workers took huge concessions in 2016. They took a $6 an hour pay cut. They took a 20% cut to their health care. They took retirement cuts. They accepted more stringent attendance requirements. Requirements that are so stringent that if you are late to work 4 times, you lose your job. And that's whether or not anything reasonable happens. You get in a car crash, somebody wrecks into you, a drunk driver wrecks you. That's one of your absences. Hope it doesn't happen 3 more times in the year. Hope you don't have 3 more times in a whole year where something happens and you're late to work. Otherwise, you might be out of a job. That's one of the things that they accepted. Mandatory overtime. People working 6-7 day weeks, 12 hours a day. These are the things that they accepted that workers sacrificed to save the company. While the people at the top actually responsible for the decisions got raises, made more money, millions of dollars a year. These freaks in the board offices kept their jobs, and as far as I can tell, no sacrifices. Nothing. Nada. And so in 2021, 5 years later, when the contract expires, the workers wanted to get back what they gave up to save the company. They said, look, the company's profitable. We did our part. We saved you. Now we want what we gave up back. We at least want some improvements from where we are. We can't take more concessions. How can you possibly expect workers to take less in an environment where their company is making record profits, where the CEO is getting huge raises? How can you expect workers to accept that? But that's what Warrior Met expected them to do. They put a contract on the table with more concessions, including an effective pay cut with $1 an hour, which was $1 an hour raise over the term of the contract, which was 4 or 5 years. $1 an hour over the life of the contract. And so the workers decided to strike. They voted down the contract by more than 95%, and the company hasn't come back with a single offer any different than the first one. And it's not because they can't afford it. They've explicitly said as much during bargaining sessions. And they're giving the scabs $2,000 a month more than they're offering the union. So they clearly have money to be able to move in their position. They're just not. So,
Which, how is that not bad faith bargaining, right?
Yeah.
There again, which I know this is a theme of this struggle, is the broken labor laws in this country.
Yeah. It's just absolutely insane. So, look, the fight is clearly a righteous one. There are unambiguous good guys, coal miners, who work, who produce something of value, who produce something that makes the world better. And then there are unambiguous bad guys, leeches who do nothing but own. Some people have this conception of business owners, and they produce and they work too, just as hard as the workers do. And some bosses work, some bosses perform labor. Sure, I guess. But what do these people do? They just decide where to put money. It's nonsense. And they're asking these people to give up money while they take more. Unambiguous good guys and unambiguous bad guys. And sometimes the bad guys win, right? Sometimes the bad guys win. Hayden's in the chat. Good morning, brothers and sisters. Thank you all for the support for us during the struggle. We appreciate, honored to be able to support. I will say from Hayden, I don't think the strike was for nothing. I hope we showed other workers not to be afraid to strike, not to be afraid to speak out against companies and equity groups exploiting them. David replied, agreed. We have to fight, and we have to know when to stop. If we don't fight, we've already lost. That's definitely exactly right. So,
yeah,
Warrior Met
and
has yet to even meet in person after requests to do so, some for a year. That's just, how is that not bad faith?
Right,
it's just,
right,
it's
absolutely.
totally ridiculous.
Yeah, and I appreciate Hayden chiming in, and I would agree with that assessment. It's easy to, on the sidelines, say it was all for naught, but what was the alternative?
Right.
And what I know we're going to talk about later in the show, some of the commentary we've seen, and it's clear that there are some people who think that basically you should just lay down and take it. Right? Any fight is futile.
Right.
You should just accept what the elites and the bosses and the powerful do. You should accept it. and just move on and not try to fight back and not try to resist. And, for me, that's never an acceptable answer.
Right.
That's not to say that every fight is a winner. That's not to say that every fight is even strategically wise, and that's separate from this particular context, but in general.
Right.
But, I think those of us who care about working people realize that the only way we've ever made life better in this country or around the world for working people is when we join together and when we organize and we build solidarity and we're able to fight back against those in power. So I have tremendous respect for all of the members who have been in this strike, and not just the members, but their families who have sacrificed. And I do hope that there are some positive things that come out of this separate from the contract. I think something we've talked about a lot on the show is the ways in which shared struggle can really build new relationships, change dynamics, within communities. And so, I think that's probably one of the things that's going to be reflected on, in the days and weeks and months ahead is the amount of solidarity that did take place.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, definitely.
I think that's something that we also shouldn't forget is that for how much more could have been done, should have been done. And, I have some pretty harsh feelings as well for some folks at, the top of this administration at the White House. And, we could get into all that. But, separate from that, there were a lot of people around the country and around the world who were supportive of this struggle and are still supportive of this struggle, who have contributed financially, who have contributed their time, who have, spread the word. And I hope that as these, 23, 22 months have just simmered on, I hope that the brothers and sisters down there have seen that and heard that solidarity. And I hope that it gave some resolve to keep going.
Yeah.
You and I heard from a brother in the United Kingdom who was getting beat by Maggie Thatcher's riot cops in the 80s.
Who said he would have been here if it wasn't for, him
he's not allowed to leave the country.
He's not allowed to leave
still.
the country. Still because of that strike.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and so, I think back to the Strike Fest event and the, motley crew of folks that were there, just the very interesting assortment of folks who were there. And I think those were glimpses of what we can be at our best when we are able to cut across divisions and other barriers to join hands as working people for a righteous cause.
Yeah. And, Infinite Content in the chat says, sometimes a loss inspires others to take up the cause and get the long-term victory. And that's definitely right. You know, and I guess the next obvious, the obvious question is, how did this happen? How is it that, at the very least, the most optimistic thing, the good guys have been forced into a tactical retreat. And, unlike what, free market freaks are going to tell you, negotiations are not nearly as much about your worth, as the power and the money you have on your side, and Warrior Met had a lot of it, as well as some good fortune. And I think the latter, the good fortune, is really, really a key thing to their to the way that they've been able to hold out during this strike, and that's that they have not felt the pinch that they might have felt otherwise because of the price of steel. Just a reminder, this is metallurgical coal, right? This is used in the production of steel. It is not energy coal. And so it is, directly tied to steel prices. Steel prices have skyrocketed, which has allowed them to record profits, even profits as much as before the strike, I think. Which is just insane, because you can look at their financial reports and see that they are producing less than they used to, right? They're producing less than they used to, but they're making more profits. I think, they're only producing, 30, 40% of what they used to. It's like a fraction of what they did when they were at 100% capacity running with union coal miners. And yet they're making higher profits. And the reason for that is not because, some magic property of coal that was mined by scabs makes it more valuable. No, obviously not. It's because of the price of coal, or the price of metallurgical coal. The price of steel has gone up, skyrocketed. And so even though it is factually the case that they've lost over $1 billion in unrealized revenue because of the strike, which is a lot of money, they haven't actually gone into debt for it. They haven't actually lost any money, which makes it difficult for them to move. Now, a purely somebody just motivated by making money, like BlackRock, they may say, well, you need to end the strike. And they did say you need to end the strike because look at all this money that we're losing. But if somebody can be contented with making millions of dollars instead of, tens of millions of dollars, as long as they can put these uppity workers in their place, right, then that's what Warrior Met seems to be interested in doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's something that came out loud and clear throughout the struggle, is that Warrior Met was more interested in power and more interested in the ability to squash their workforce and to bust the union than they were just pure profits, right? I mean, the bottom line dollar amounts were not as important as the power. And that's not necessarily unique to Warrior Met. Unfortunately, it's been particularly egregious with them. And, they are a case study in corporate greed run amok in this country and what it's doing to communities across this country.
Yeah. And also, obviously, the law. The law is stacked against workers. And I'm sorry, before you get into the law, I did want to make sure we mention, and maybe you said this and I didn't hear you, but, the metallurgical coal and the steel prices going up, in some cases is connected to the broader energy crisis in Europe and across the world. And, the miners couldn't predict that there was going to be war in Ukraine when it happened, and the way that has played out in the industry and how that has had ripple effects on into met coal. And, because it's the war, it's the sanctions connected to the war, all of that has really disrupted the marketplace. Right. And so, Warrior Met has gotten lucky. Basically, they got lucky that the timing on this just happened to coincide with a spike in prices for them. So that, the material factors here just made it that much harder. And so, obviously another one of the factors that has led to this is the law. The law is stacked against working people. And one of the most obvious things is that workers are not allowed to conduct mass pickets anymore. Mass pickets that prohibit scabs from entering the mine, that eliminate production. Mass pickets that make production impossible are illegal. They used to be legal. They used to be legal in this country, but now they're illegal. And we talked about the whole history of how mass picketing was made illegal. But it's illegal now. And people will say that's fine. They'll say that's fine because the coal company has these property rights to, and so they should be able to do whatever, right? And that's so, I can't understand the thinking about that. How do you gymnast your way, flip into this mindset that allows out-of-state billionaire investment groups to have more control over our resources than we do? Why shouldn't folks who have dedicated their entire lives to these mines, why should they not be able to stand at the gate and say, no, you can't mine this coal without agreeing to what we're asking for. You just can't do it. You can't do it. I'm an Alabamian. These are my mines. I've spent 30, 50 years in here. My granddaddy mined these mines. No. You can't, if we're not going down there, nobody can. Why shouldn't Alabamians have that right? Just because somebody has money? It's nonsense. It's totally insane. It's a totally insane way of thinking to allow these people, just because they have money, to screw over our people and tell us how we are going to mine the coal. It's insane. Totally insane. And then, even if we say, okay, look, it's illegal to mass picket, that's one thing. But it's another to have completely unreasonable penalties for breaking the law. Because sometimes you can look at the law and you say, look, it's worth breaking the law. I'm willing to take punishment for it. I'm willing to sit in jail for a few days. I'm willing to pay this small fine. Companies do this all the time. The law has been structured in such a way that when companies break the law, they do break the law as a matter of business and say, oh, well, look, the fine was only $20,000, and I'm going to be able to make, $10 million in profit off of this. That's fine. I'll break the law and I'll pay the fine. Working people can't do that because they had injunctions placed on them that would put them in jail for years, give them felony charges, and have fines of $300,000 on people who break the injunction.
Just completely unreasonable. I mean,
totally
by
unreasonable.
Any standard.
Totally unreasonable. And the injunctions it's not even like the injunction are like, oh, you can't mass picket. You can't prevent people from coming into the mines. The injunctions said no picketing.
Right.
No picketing.
You can't
at
have
all for months.
You can't have a dozen people.
You can't have, there was like 2 or 3 months where you couldn't have anybody. It was illegal. You would have faced a fine of hundreds of thousands of dollars and jail time and a felony charge if you stood silently at the side of the road with a sign as scabs walked in and took your job. That's insane. That's insane. The law is broken. The law is broken. And then we've got our politicians who are going even above and beyond the law.
Now, these same politicians who want you to love the Constitution, right? The same Constitution that is supposed to guarantee you the right to freedom of assembly and freedom of speech.
Right. We've got these politicians who are going above and beyond the law to support the company. You've got Kay Ivey, who is allowing her state troopers with our tax dollars, right? The public's money, theoretically, these people running around, with a license to kill, acting like they own the place, theoretically they work for us, in some ultimate sense. They work for Alabamians, not for out-of-state international private equity groups, theoretically. But this strike showed that that's not the case. That's not the case. They do work for these international private equity firms, right? Because they were giving scabs emergency escorts. They were speeding these scabs, breaking the law to get these scabs to work faster. And when coal miners said, okay, we have an issue with that. We have an issue with that. We have an issue with you breaking the speed limit in our communities to get these dirty, rotten scabs to work. We've got an issue with that. And so what we're going to do, we're going to get in front of these scab escorts and just go the speed limit. We're just going to go the speed limit. I mean, how mild of a response. I'm just going to go the speed limit. And they got tickets. They were ticketed by enforcers of the law for going the speed limit in front of an emergency escort. Wicked, evil, these people. It's just bizarre. And Kay Ivey allowed that to happen. And we saw from Tim James's gubernatorial run that, there are things within the law that that a governor could do to support these workers. The governor has the ability to utilize state safety and environmental agencies to investigate the mines, right? And we've seen these scabs pollute the Warrior River near this mine. That didn't happen before the scabs came in. This river's at multiple times turned black in places. Scabs have been carried out in ambulances and helicopters because they messed up and hurt themselves. No safety investigations, no environmental investigations, nothing from the governor as these scabs are polluting our rivers and hurting themselves doing it. Nothing. No pressure from the governor on the company. In Tuberville, of course, staying silent, reading from company press releases as a Vermont senator, as a senator from Vermont, of all the people in this story, Bernie Sanders has the clearest way to say, this isn't my fight. This isn't, this is happening all the way literally across the country from me, from Vermont to Alabama. And he brings these people up to testify. Alabama coal miners to testify. And Tuberville reads from this international private equity firm's press release. And Joe Biden and Marty Walsh, supposedly the most pro-labor administration in the history of the United States. Nothing. And I even saw Marty Walsh down here in Birmingham when he was touting the administration's infrastructure law, whatever. I saw UMWA officials come up to him and talk to him. Ask him for support personally. I saw that happen in front of my eyes and nothing. Lizard people. These people, they're all lizard people. I don't know how to explain it. It's just, I don't know. And, of course, I also think that even within the bounds of the law, there was more that the union could have done. I think that there should have been more to engage the rail unions. The rails for taking this scab coal, because I've been convinced that the Railway Labor Act allows for secondary strikes. I've been convinced of that. And it doesn't seem like there was certainly not any attempt to put public pressure on the international leadership of these rail unions to do more to support the strike. And I think that it just seems weird to me. If there were public calls to the Teamster president, Sean O'Brien, to do something about this, the Teamsters are who the international union that the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen are affiliated with, I don't see how Sean O'Brien couldn't respond. I don't see how that couldn't happen. They also did, it just seems to me that the membership was not engaged as much as they could be. There just wasn't anything happening for most of the time. There was a lot happening as far as mutual aid and supporting each other and all of this. But just not a lot to pressure the company. And, I offer those critiques knowing that I'm not a member of the UMWA. I offer those critiques knowing that I'm 26 years old, a young person. I offer those critiques knowing that I've never been in a strike, right? By the nature of my job, I will probably never be in a strike, right? And so, I offer all those critiques with that caveat and in a brotherly way and in good faith. And with a heavy heart, words can't, my heart just aches for the miners there. And my chest burns with anger at the people that are responsible for this. And I've been reading a couple of books about a paper strike that was lost in 1987 and 1988 in Jay, Maine. That's really fascinating, and I'd recommend people read the books. Julius Getman, and I want to get these people on. These authors are still alive. I want to get them on the show sometime. The books are fantastic. But Julius Getman's The Betrayal of Local 14, Paper Workers, Politics, and Permanent Replacements, and Peter Kellman's Divided We Fall, the story of the Paper Workers Union. I recommend folks read them. They're really good, and I can't help but see the similarities in this, because this was a long strike. It was called off after a year and a half, I think, or 2 years. And at the end of the strike, a striker wrote this letter that I think is a really good place to kind of wrap up for me anyway. I don't know if Adam is going to have anything else to say, but this was by Phil Edwards. He was a paper striker, member of the United Paper Workers International Union, who participated in the strike against international paper in Jay, Maine in 1987 and 1988. Phil Edwards. Brothers and sisters, family members, friends of labor. My father built bridges under fire in France in World War I, and my brother died in a B-17 over England in World War II. I landed on a beach in North Korea in 1950, and the country and the government were behind us in those days. But in 1987, in Jay, Maine, we had a war about corporate greed and the depredation of workers' rights. And where then was the government? And where then was the country? Did the governor of the state or the president of the United States stand up to corporate America? They did, in fact, encourage the pillaging of workers' hard-earned benefits. Where was the United States Congress? Where was the national media during our struggle? What does the International Executive Board think is the important issue here? Are they concerned that they will deplete their funds? I tell you, they should have been ready to sell everything they own to win this conflict. Are working people anywhere naive enough to think this is not their work? To those of you who helped, and your numbers are legion, I give my thanks, my most earnest and heartfelt thanks. But to those who did not, I would paraphrase John Donne. Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Sisters and brothers, I do not have the words to ease your pain on this sorry occasion. Each of you have given your time, your energy, and your personal fortune to advance the cause of labor during this dark age. History will record that you, like the embattled farmers at Concord Bridge, fired a shot heard round the world. Do not despair that the battle was lost along another front. Mark well that in this place you stood, shoulder to shoulder, faced the enemy, and did not flinch nor bow down. I have known some of you for most of the 30-odd years that I have worked at International Paper. I have found you to be honest tradesmen in the Maine tradition. Since the strike began, I have come to realize how much I value your friendship. I have seen lambs become lions and sparrows become eagles. From your ranks have emerged salesmen and lawyers, organizers and orators. You have been tempered into steel in the crucible of war, and you will never again be as you were before. I could not allow this moment to pass without telling you how proud my wife and I are to have soldiered with you.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.